And I do believe we should be live to the Facebook, people. So good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, afternoon, evening. I hope it could be evening somewhere if people are watching. I hope so.
Yeah.
So what is going on this morning? What are we doing? What are we talking about? What is happening on the Unifying Force?
So this week we are going back into speculation about the multiverse. Let me remove my PP. Multiverses and worlds between worlds. Oh, that's the most important and relevant image I could conjure up in my head. And you have it right there. Yeah, so it's in the Clone Wars, it's in Rebels, it's officially canon. It was theorized in the expanded universe, but it's very real in the Disney universe. And it's important in the Star Wars galaxy in a very extracurricular, extra mythological, cultural, spiritual kind of way. But if you want to go deep diving, the way we love to do on this channel and in this group and in the fan community, then there's a lot to love, a lot to dissect, a lot to analyze. And we're going to keep going with the world between worlds and how it relates to people's beliefs and customs and traditions on planet Earth. So let's go. Catherine, would you like to say something? Sorry.
I thought I wanted to give you the lead because you had some pretty interesting ideas for how to tie this into a lot of real world spiritual places. So I thought let you take the lead first on this.
Okay, sure. Okay, so let's go. I very fortunately managed to convince somebody in my house finally to begin watching the Mortis arc in the Clone Wars, and it might be a little far back chronologically from the world between worlds, but I think it's really important to start there. So just to recap on what we've discussed in previous weeks, we've got into the importance of the altar of Mortis and the Lords of Mortis, which are these three almost revered but secret sacred figures who are embodiments of aspects of the Force in the Star Wars universe. So you have the father, you have the daughter, you have the son. The father is balance and control and discipline and order. The son is absolute chaos and destruction. And the daughter is absolute harmony, serenity, and creation. And between the three of them, you have a center point. And that is where the prophecy of the chosen one comes in. Anakin Skywalker is believed to be the one who unites the three in the middle, and if needed, can take the place of any one of the 3 points. And so the father, unfortunately, has to be replaced due to his immortality ending and him passing into the next realm, which is, again, another aspect of the world between worlds, because where would an immortal being in the Star Wars galaxy go once he or she dies? It's mentioned by Qui-Gon Jinn, there's the netherworld of the Force that Yoda refers to at the end of Revenge of the Sith, saying that a friend of ours has discovered the pathway to immortality and returned from the netherworld of the Force. And then Obi-Wan's eyes widen. He says, Qui-Gon, because Qui-Gon Jinn is the first Jedi Master within the Star Wars known galaxy history that we've seen on screen, to find the pathway to the beyond and still commune and connect with the here and now. And so his Force spirit can manifest visually and auditorily to Obi-Wan and to Yoda, and also to Anakin. And we might see that happen in the Kenobi Obi-Wan series, which is why the world between worlds will always be relevant from now on. And also because the conceptualization came from George Lucas, and then the visualization and production of it, and the conveying of it to us as an audience came from his daughter, Katie Lucas, who wrote the script for the Mortis arc, Dave Filoni, and Jon Favreau. And they're all heavily involved in Star Wars now and going forward. So we can keep looking forward at this, looking back and looking at present. And the reason why I keep using this back, forward, and present time analogy is because time is circular and not linear, which is why the world between worlds is fascinating. It's
Time is a
theorized.
flat circle.
Yeah, time is a flat circle. Shout out to True
And I
Detective
think we'll
Matthew McConaughey.
and I
Right
think
or
we'll
right or
more than
right.
likely see a lot of this in the upcoming Ahsoka series as well.
Of course, yes, yeah. Because is there a theorized timeline for when that's going to be? Is it going to be parallel to the Mandalorian, or before or after?
I think so, because they've already confirmed that the epilogue scene in Rebels takes place after her appearance in The Mandalorian, when
Oh.
she's meeting up with Sabine to go find Ezra and Thrawn. And they've said that all these series around the Mandalorian timeline are going to lead up to a big crossover event, which I assume will be Thrawn related. So I don't think they're going to like kill him off in the Ahsoka show. I think they're going to introduce him there. I would imagine it'd be. I'm thinking the Ahsoka show is going to be almost like an Apocalypse Now type of thing, like the journey to Thrawn type of thing, where you finally to build up this character, and then they'll drop whatever the big crossover show is going to be and announce that at a future celebration, perhaps, to get to the the big story.
Yeah, do their
But I
version
do
of
love
Flashpoint.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
and it's like, and even with the image you got there behind you, David, that definitely hits at the whole Flashpoint type stuff, because the fact that the Mortis gods are part of the world between worlds. I mean, when they first showed up, it was like this diamond-shaped spacecraft type of thing floating in space, and it's like it wasn't really some type of ethereal portal or whatever, but it probably was just presenting itself that way. So Anakin and Ahsoka and Obi-Wan would go to investigate. Oh, it's a ship. Let's check it out, type of thing. But seeing as Ahsoka now pretty much has the spirit of the daughter living within her, yes, that's pretty cool. I wonder how that's going to come into play if she goes back into the world between worlds, because now she has like the Maori House following her around everywhere. The Morai.
Yeah, she does. It was a good symbol in Star Wars Rebels. So going forward from the Mortis arc, we have in the first episode Overlords, where they discover the ship, and that's the one that's just being watched right now in a parallel room, but in this timeline. And so they see the ship. It's a distress call that Yoda and Admiral Yularen are shown to be discussing in the opening monologue, to be something that is from 2,000 years before the current Jedi and Republic era. And Yoda looks quite forlorn and confused, thinking, wow, this signal's older than I am. I didn't think I'd come across anything like that. So it's an old Jedi distress call emanating from this part of space, which they investigate. Rex and the Jedi cruiser go there, and Anakin, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan are meant to rendezvous, and they're in the exact same space, but none of them can see each other, yet they are talking. So it's very Star Trekian initially. Then they see the ship, and that's also very much a kind of next generation Star Trek type trope, where they see a ship and then it's all mysterious and they cannot establish contact, even though they attempt to visually and verbally. And then they suddenly all knock out and they awaken on a mysterious beachfront on a planet they don't recognize. They have no GPS, no coordinates, no satellite signal. Nothing is working, and they don't know how they got there or who landed the ship, but it's in one piece and they're all safe. And they begin to explore the land, and they very quickly come across this divine kind of Triforce, to use a Legend of Zelda reference. But yeah, the fun thing about this is, culturally and mythologically, the number 3 seems to be the magic number. It seems to be revered, holy, sacrosanct, something that's prime. 3 is a prime number, and it's central to many things, institutionally, and also of cultural, mythological, religious, and spiritual significance, and then also architecturally. So just looking at the image behind, Dave, you've got the almost the pyramidal shapes. And how is a pyramid created? So you've got a square base, but from the side aspect portrait, it's triangular. So you have equidistant left and right, and then the top point. And then you can look at symbology throughout even just the relatively short American history. You have on the dollar bills, you have the eye, which, without going into conspiracy theory plot holes, is mentioned by some fictional writers to be Illuminati based. I don't really know, Masonic type things, but we do know that in our architecture all around, whether it's a new building or a very, very old pre-war building, or pre-revolution building, you have history, legacy, and culturally important moments or thoughts or beliefs embedded into the architecture.
Well, and they
In
bring
London,
that to everything. Is the Trinity is from the Holy Trinity, even to the. I don't think it's any sort of coincidence that in the latest, I think latest is probably, I don't know that anything's come out after it, is instance of pop culture referring to the multiverse, and there are 3 timekeepers in the Loki show. I don't think there's any I don't think there's any sort of coincidence in that. I think it's using that same trope that we're talking about in the World Between Worlds.
that sounds like it, definitely. I need to watch Loki.
Spoiler alert. Sorry.
No, it's all right. To me, that if a narrative device is enough of a spoiler for a TV show, film, or book, that thing doesn't hold up enough by itself. So if it can be spoiled by a story point that's chronologically coming at the end, or a twist, and that's the only thing that hooks you in, and now it's been revealed to you, that to me, that's poor or weak storytelling to me. So I always look at the other parts of it. So if it's something that I know is going to be spoiled for me, and I hear it or see it, read it, then I will just focus on the other aspects of a film or a TV show to keep my attention, such as how it's made or produced, or rather than how it's written. But
well,
yeah, the 3.
well, I was going to say also that the whole Mortis exists also in its own pocket dimension, because at the end of that arc, as far as Rex is concerned, Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka were only off the radar for like a second. Like they didn't actually, he didn't think they actually disappeared, like metaphysically or anything. Similar to the Loki show again, where you have the pocket dimension where He Who Remains was manipulating everything, outside the space-time continuum. So, and I went back and watched the series of episodes where Yoda goes to the heart of the galaxy, and I don't recall seeing any connection between the World Between Worlds and Mortis in that series, but I imagine there would have to be, because that's kind of where the Force emanates from, at the heart of the galaxy. But we haven't really seen, and I wonder if the disembodied voices, like the Force priestesses, may have been some other reincarnated faction of the Mortis gods in some way, But we do see places like this on Earth as well, like plenty of religious sites where people believe they could, commune with the other side, so to speak, kind of like, Karnak, where once a year you'd have all the priests going from Luxor to Karnak, and that, the public would be able to come out and, worship the whole caravan that came out presenting the ox with all of their, idols and gods, and so to speak. And when they got to Karnak, the priests would go into the building, and back when it was still like fully standing, you would basically, it'd be like this labyrinth. So they're going in round in circles, kind of going deeper and deeper until you're really deprived of a lot of oxygen, so to speak, in there, where they would suddenly be able to have all these visions and, commune with their gods and be at another plane of existence where the general public was like never allowed. And you see places like that in all sorts of religions, where if you're the high priest, you get, special permission to, commune or whatnot. And that seems to be, in a way, kind of what the World Between Worlds is doing. It's like this other, because again, they specifically brought Anakin there because they wanted Anakin, or the father did. Because he thought, no, you're the one who's going to be capable of maintaining the balance. And I did find it interesting that he's like, oh, everything that's going to happen has to happen, which is why he expunges the memories from Anakin's mind to make sure it still does happen. Yeah. Which seems to suggest that he's, like, the father must have specifically been involved in the Force's endgame of, we need to make the Jedi better, we need to get rid of the Sith and do all this. But apparently he thought that the way to do that was to bring Anakin into the World Between Worlds, and then when that didn't work out, the plan just, I guess, continues according to plan. I don't really know. It's just, it's interesting.
This deal's getting worse all the time.
And I think it's funny that you say end game, that it's the end game, because what happens,
the World Between Worlds,
one solution that Doctor Strange saw, where the Avengers come forward, that Tony has to You know, that one thing in the end game is whatever has to happen. And again, it says Ahsoka to Ezra at the time is, Ezra, he's come in the world between worlds. It's time travel. It's this. What's the one thing you want to do? Is you want to go back and save your master, but you can't, because he gave his life to save all of you. If you go back and you change that, we're all dead, and this didn't happen.
Yeah.
I also find it interesting that the certain places that you're shown in the world between worlds, like he was specifically, like Ezra is specifically being shown a lot of places from the Skywalker saga, and then the event from Rebels, and where Ahsoka nearly got killed by Vader, and where Kanan was about to die as well. And I'm wondering what the logic is as to how, like, what portal goes to what place, like really, like I wonder if you're in there and if you know about how to maneuver the world between worlds better, if you could maybe potentially go wherever you want, or if it was just like a very specific selection by whatever higher power there is trying to tempt Ezra to, mess with fate, so to speak.
Yeah. Who do you think, if anything, do you think there's an embodiment characterized persona that controlled Ezra and Ahsoka's viewing and presence and location within the world between worlds?
I know that Palpatine eventually intervenes at some point, but given that the father and the daughter and the son had all already died, but the daughter in a sense is still living in Ahsoka.
That's what I think. Yeah, I think Ahsoka's led by some subconscious spirit within her.
Right, and it is kind of interesting that with the father and the son and the daughter all dead, I guess you could argue that there's still balance because those ones are gone. But the way the father so firmly believed that everything in the galaxy would fall into chaos without this level of balance, it's like, well, now that you've gotten rid of the representation of the light and the dark and the balance, then shouldn't everything still be chaotic in the galaxy by extension? It's like there's a lot of unanswered questions about it, which I like, because Dave Filoni did say that every possible question you could have about Immortus and all of that have very specific answers, but they're not going to give them to us.
So let me ask this question, and I don't know if I'm thinking it, hopefully some of our viewers are thinking it. Are the Father, the Son, and the Daughter God? Because whether or not it's an artifact of the fact that Star Wars was written in English, we have little words that throw us in there. As they mention God, they mention hell. I don't know if that was an intentional thing by Lucas or just he's using common expressions. Are they God, or is there yet another higher power of God above them?
Catherine, what do you think? I'll go second.
Well, it's kind of like back at the very beginning, as early as 1975, he was having the whole story be told by the Wills, which were these, godlike beings who wrote the scripture of all of the events of everything, kind of like the Watchers of the Marvel Universe, so to speak, who just kind of observe everything that's going on. And you can definitely say it's an allusion to God, but the question is it like supposed to be actually God, or is it like science? Like I think it was in the Doctor Strange movie, even they say, well, where I'm from, magic and science are one and the same type of thing. And that could be, and that's often what you find in religion. They find these religious miracles, and then you study it a bit further, and you come up with like a scientific explanation for something. Kind of like when a lot of people used to see things like the Aurora Borealis and had no idea what it was until science came along and was able to explain it. And it's like, oh, it's the gods, community or whatever. So I do think that it is like an analogy for God, but I don't know. Given that we don't really know what they are, what those Mortis gods are metaphysically, kind of like, again, going back to the Marvel example, the Norse gods, so to speak, aren't really actual gods. It's just like a type of title, like even like Odin says, we're mortal, we live, we die, we have normal lives. No, it wasn't in Doctor Strange. It was in the Thor movie where he says,
it was in Thor. Thor says it to Jane Foster. Yeah,
he says that to Jane Foster. So it's like, okay, they're not actual gods, but primitive people would perceive it that way. So I wonder if there's something similar going on with the Mortis gods, because they could be. I mean, they're using, because again, we've seen what people can do with the Force. Like we talked about last time with the witches of Dathomir, and how they can do radically different things with the Force. How the Jedi and the Sith, and then the people who are neither Jedi Sith, the people that Luke encountered after Return of the Jedi, when he went to study the Force. So it's like, are the Mortis gods just people who have a really good grip on the Force compared to other beings, or are they actually gods? And it could certainly be a parable for both.
Yeah,
And absolutely a parable. If Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan landed on this planet and started lifting things with the Force, is he looks enough like our representation of Jesus, and that means that
yeah,
there Jesus is God is here.
yeah. They have so I was just listening to the first chapter in the Mortis saga called Overlords, and I turned around after feeding the cat about an hour ago, and it cut to a scene where it had the father looking almost dead already, and actually he was statuesque, and it was very dark, and it was a side profile. He was like this, and then suddenly you heard a zoom, and you saw the point, sharp, very sharp. I didn't realize lightsabers were so sharp in Clone Wars. Very sharp point of Anakin's blue lightsaber in front of his nose. And then the camera pans up the lightsaber blade to Anakin's face, which is very stern, looking as if he's going to Count Dooku, the old man. And he says, and the father saying something as if, again, he's trying to use his charisma and connect kind of like spiritually to Anakin and say, chaos will reign if you do not stay. You are the chosen one. And Anakin says, listen, old man, I've had enough of your tricks and illusions. The chosen one prophecy is a myth. We all know it. And he says, no, is it a myth? Let me test you. And then he tests him at the end of that chapter where Anakin is in the middle of a stage. The daughter, as the kind of griffin phoenix type white bird, is on one side with Ahsoka in her talons. And on the other side is Obi-Wan. Ahsoka's in the grip of the son. And Obi-Wan's in the grip of the daughter, because Obi-Wan represents kind of wisdom, and he's a paragon of goodness and virtue. And Ahsoka is teetering on the edge because she's so connected to Anakin, who we know is on the brink anyway. So she's tempted by the darkness within Anakin, the darkness within herself, and the darkness the sun represents, which is, like anger and rage and chaos and destruction. So he's in his demonic beast form on the right hand side, holding Ahsoka in his talons, and they're both like that. Obi-Wan's in the middle, and the father's at the back, almost on a throne, watching with the popcorn, like the Michael Jackson meme. And then he says, "If you are the chosen one, you will be able to save your friends." And Anakin's looking at himself like, "What the heck do I do?" And then suddenly he kind of meditates, has a Zen moment, and then does that, and grabs both with the Force and commands both this daughter and the son to release them. It kind of reminds you in Harry Potter, the Cruciate Curse, which is one of the 3 unforgivable curses. If you commit them on another witch or wizard, you're excommunicated from the wizarding world, because you physically debilitate someone by controlling their muscles and their joints and their nerves. And that's kind of what the Force grip that Anakin uses was so powerful. He overcame these spiritual embodiments of aspects of the Force, and they were crying out in pain. And then he pushed it, he gently moves Obi-Wan and Ahsoka to the side, and they're kind of, I think they're unconscious and limp on the floor, lying down, but no longer in any physical harm's way. And then he does that, and he Force pushes one to the right and Force pushes one to the left simultaneously. I can't do it because I'm so like that. And it's a great power move. It's very visually fantastic. And he's in the center, and the camera then starts spinning, and it's really well shot for an animated film, in essence. It's incredible visual storytelling, because you could have no music, no audio, no background information, and understand what's going on in essence, which is somebody is all powerful in the center, and he has to choose now, what does he do with his great strength? He's overpowered these incredible beings of light and dark, because visually you see darkness kind of emanating from, in kind of shadowy wisps and tendrils, from the sun when he's in his demon bird form, and the daughter in her Phoenician white bird form. She's a bit like the holy dove, and there's the light that kind of distorts and shimmers around her. And sometimes when the father's talking, he has that light as well. But in other times, as the mentioned scene I just described, he's in shadow and he looks statuesque or even dead. And I think that's to represent him being the one in the middle. And yeah, just going back to the analogy of, are they God or not? In our world, we've got the Holy Trinity, very famously, that we all know of: the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, or Holy Ghost, which are 3 elements to describe the great higher power. And I think all 3 of them are equally important, from what I understand. But they are aspects of the one, not kind of separate, really.
Right. They're
some
3, but they're not 3. They're 3, but they're 1.
Yeah, exactly.
Important distinction.
Yeah. Another
And in the East, in Eastern philosophy, it's entirely based upon the same thing. You have three that represent the one as well. And I think that there's a common origin. I've been having a deep dive into this just for fun myself, looking at Roman and Greek literature and the classic stuff, and then going back a little bit further into the language and the linguistic exchange of ideas with migration and empires and stuff, before Roman times and before even classical Greek times. And the Holy Trinity idea also exists in the East, which is why you have it in the Legend of Zelda games, because you have what's described as the Triforce. And the Triforce has three elements, and it's triangular again, and it's represented by three triangles that make up a larger triangle. So a triangle here, triangle there, and a triangle gap in the middle, because they're all equilateral. And it's a great symbol for the Legend of Zelda series, and it represents, so Link embodied, there are three goddesses that represent wisdom, courage, and power. And each of them individually are immortal and all-powerful mystical beings, but together they represent one overall cosmic power. And there's a name for the cosmic power in the Legend of Zelda universe in Hyrule. I don't remember what it is, but I think it's Din, Fayore, and Nairu are the three goddesses, and they each create a Triforce shard, part of three. The three need to be united to have overall ultimate power. And Ganondorf, the main villain, the Emperor Palpatine, the Sith master of the entire Zelda games, wants all three. Just like the Emperor in Star Wars wants the world between worlds, he wants to control Mortis, he wants to distort Ahsoka and Ezra and then Anakin and so on. He's all about manipulating everything to acquire stuff. He's very materialistic, very egotistical, and it's all so he has ultimate power to then protect what he has and gain more, which is very much a colonization, imperialistic mindset, which makes sense because he is emperor. And he's aspired to be emperor from throughout the Star Wars canon leading up to Revenge of the Sith, as Palpatine, Sheev Palpatine, Senator, Chancellor, and obviously Darth Sidious. So he's been pulling things behind the pulling strings behind the scenes. But the Holy Three is a common factor in Star Wars and in the West and in the East. So in the East, you have Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Brahma is creative force, Shiva is preservation, and Vishnu is preservation, and Shiva is destruction. And they are drawn and idolized by some groups as individual gods and goddesses, and they have many other names and many other incarnations and avatars. However, these are just three avatars. So the word avatar genuinely means an incarnation of a divine spirit or a great power. But you can have an avatar on Earth, which is how we get the term avatar in popular language and popular culture and in a great TV series. And in a pretty good James Cameron film. It's something that represents something more from beyond, from another time, another space. So these three in Eastern Dharma, Eastern philosophies, which kind of in Western lens and Eurocentric lenses, we might call the Hindu religion, in the Buddhist faith, the Sikh faith, the Jain faith, the Taoist faith, they all have this three, and they have different names for it. But essentially, it's the same three that refer to the one. So the three are referred to in some spiritual traditions as simple players. You know, the people at the front of the theater, and the director is the supreme being. The director you don't see. You don't need to understand. You don't need to hear from her or him. It's fine. Just accept that the director's putting on a great show, and you are in the audience and you're watching. Or ideally, you get up on stage and you join them in the cosmic dance of creation, preservation, destruction. Well, and it's cyclical. So
speaking of putting on that show, like you were talking about, another parable for God that you see in the Mortis trilogy is that when Anakin, journeys down into the cave and through all the twisting around the cave system, and he meets the son who shows him his mission. It's like, this is a lot like Moses and Muhammad going to the top of the hill and getting their vision from God. But unlike Moses and Muhammad, who were eager to carry out the vision, Anakin was not. He wanted nothing to do with it. And it's only when the father found out what Anakin was shown that he decided, no, this is a really great path for you. And then just expunged the memory from Anakin's mind. And so he ends up inadvertently carrying out the vision anyway.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. And it also, I don't know why, I can't believe I didn't think about this when we were talking about on our Mortis episode, but it's like, did the son foretell the future, or is he writing the future as he sees fit, and that the father just kind of agreed with it? Because that's something they didn't really go into. Because with a place like the world between worlds existing, then that means you can't. The future would always be uncertain, like Yoda says. Always in motion is the future, and technically the past, with the world between worlds being messed with as well. But it did seem like an interesting little flip on that. It's like you have these two major religious figures who want to carry out the vision. You have Anakin who doesn't, but then the gods that be determine, no, you need to carry out this vision. So that could be, like you were saying, that also ties in with that, the whole, the scripture of the, playing along with God, like everybody's on a character in a play, so to speak, reading off all lines.
Yeah, I mean, it's in Shakespeare as well. I think there's a lot of spirituality behind a lot of medieval and Elizabethan literature, including what Shakespeare writes. But definitely Christopher Marlowe, that's what George Lucas alludes to with the deal with the devil, Anakin and Palpatine. That's Dr. Faustus. Essentially, do you give away part of your soul to acquire a power that, or access something you do not have access to, that is forbidden, or that is too powerful from mere mortal minds? And if so, what are the consequences? That's what Dr. Faustus is all about. It's a Faustian pact to make a deal with the devil. And obviously it comes from scriptures and also from myths and traditions too. And that's a fundamental temptation story behind Star Wars, and behind the fall of Anakin Skywalker to become Darth Vader, that I think a lot of people misunderstood when they watched Revenge of the Sith, because they thought, oh, it's a quick turn. Anakin he was a good guy, and then he was in the play watching Darth Plagueis' tragedy, and then he had a bit of a chat, and then he just says, oh yeah, Mace Windu is wrong, I'll side with this old guy. But they've been friends for 12 years, and he's been kind of groomed by Palpatine in his formative years as the only person he could confide in, because Obi-Wan is bound by the rigidity of organized religion, one could say. The very monastic, quite strict version of the Jedi Order that we see in the classical Republic during the Star Wars 1 to 3. And I think that's, again, something George Lucas wanted to say. He wanted to criticize all our institutions, whether it's organized religion in the West, or foreign and domestic, issues and governance, taxation, travel, imperialism, warmongering, materialism, definitely, all these different things, and just generally philosophical attitudes. Because in the New Hope, there is deep philosophy and spirituality, but it only comes from the good guys. You don't know anything about what the bad guys feel or think. And it's only when you realize that Luke is actually on a journey where he's being tempted, so he might become a bad guy. And then in The Empire Strikes Back, you realize he comes from the darkness himself. He is the seed of the devil. Because Anakin, you could say, is a bit like Lucifer in a way. So the story and the way he falls is a little different. But again, it comes down to what? Sin, temptation, lust, maybe. Definitely anger, definitely ego and pride being hurt, and definitely revenge, which is why I think Revenge of the Sith is probably the most useful title for anybody who's new to Star Wars. If you're wondering why the films are named the way they are, or you want some inkling about what the film's about, I think Revenge of the Sith and Return of the Jedi, I think, make the most sense. But I like all the titles. But I definitely think that I agree with what you're saying, Catherine. I think there's a quasi-religious, definitely not pseudo, there's a definite spiritual element to the hero's journey and the odyssey that they make. And you can take it back to Odysseus, Achilles, Heracles. In Hellenic tradition, you have Virgil, you have Dante in the Inferno, in the Divine Comedy, which kicked off the Italian and then European Renaissance, where everyone started looking back at ancient and classical Rome and ancient and classical Greece, and started mining ideas for artistic and musical and creative concepts to bring them back to rebirth.
Yeah, and we all know that Lucas, it's been well documented that Lucas specifically took a study of mythologies, while writing Star Wars. So let's get back to what we were talking about before. We've mentioned Karnak, but the purpose of this episode, and I think we've done a good job, is giving some backstory, because we need it, because this is stuff that's there. like we talked about Karnak, the Temple of Karnak in Egypt. Where's some other real places, some places in this plane of existence on this planet that are similar, that have allusions to the world between worlds?
Okay. Shall I go?
Yeah.
Sorry, I feel like I've been talking a long time, and you can probably hear the hoarseness in my voice. Don't worry, COVID negative. Had 2 vaccines. Anyway, so there's actually a list in Eastern traditions that was again, there was actually a spiritual and revolutionary renaissance in South Asia that happened in parallel to the end of the European Renaissance. So people put that around the 13th century with Dante, and beginning of the 14th century when Inferno was made, and then the Divine Comedy, and then for about 3 centuries afterwards. And musically, I'm not classically musically trained at all, but I know that the kind of classical era, Baroque era, and then the operas obviously allude to these things. And some of the operas refer to things like Dante and the Inferno. And in Dante, he talks about the circles of hell. And there are some Western scholars who believe that Dante used real world moments to describe parts of the circles of hell. So Vesuvius, Etna, you could say, which were quite local to Dante, but still very far away from Florence, given he's in the northeast, and they're in the very south of Italy. But as horrible and terrifying as things like Pompeii were, and still are, and would have been when Dante was around in 1290 to 1335 or whatever, he would have known about these things. And I think when there's a site of annihilation or destruction, you can almost feel, if you're an empath or you have a lot of compassion, or you just care about the history and the legacy of places, you can visit those places and really feel something very deep. I think that's why people go to museums and and memorials, or even you go to somewhere where someone passed away and there's a gravestone. You memorialize the dead, not for them. It's for you, really. It's for you to remember them and remember how it was when they were alive and the good things. And I think Dante would have done that with Etna and Vesuvius, and the destruction that came about with the death of many things and destruction would have inspired him to write about, from a spiritual aspect, the spiritual odyssey of him going after Beatrice down the circles of hell, in the Inferno, to find the soul that he loved and to bring her back. But in a more
pause right there, Catherine. What were you going to say?
Yeah, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, as far as places that are actually relevant to the world between worlds, it would be places also like go to the heart of the Aztec Empire. When you go to like the temples of Teotihuacan, and you read about how the high priests would go to the top of the mountain, and the top of the temples, and that's where they're they would always have their, even in Nazca, where they discovered that the Nazca lines were more in relationship to measuring the solstice and measuring the seasons. Yeah. And so it's like you go up there to kind of commune with whatever's on the other side, or places like Stonehenge. They've been trying to, there are all sorts of theories as to what it is that's going on there, but that's also another way that's actually, tied into like those types of spiritual locations. And so there's all sorts of like little places like that. And admittedly, we don't know 100% if that's what they feel is actually going on there, but you can definitely tie those things back in as far as being other like pseudo-religious places, sort of like how when Plato was talking about Atlantis, it was a parable for Cairo and Alexandria, Egypt and Thebes and all of that, like the heart of the Egyptian things. And so for as far as world between worlds go, it's sort of like one real world parable, I guess you could say, is that it's like the idea of reflecting on your life, communing with your past, places of self-reflection, which happens a lot in Buddhism, places that, other Buddhist temples where they want you to, your self-fulfilled type life, find your own purposes for it. So you could throw in Buddhist temples there as well as being like because in Star Wars, admittedly, it gets very literal, where you're able to walk through an actual portal and be able to go into whatever other portals you want to. But I think it's in the real world, it's also a much more spiritual type thing where you're, reflecting on your life and your life's choices, and certain religious sites are specifically tied to that idea. Again, like the places like Karnak or the temples of the heart of the Aztec Empire. You have places, so you kind of see where Lucas is drawing some of those parallels from. Yeah,
there's also the Mayan.
I think the image even behind me here, the quintessential image of the world between worlds, this is very reminiscent of the Nazca lines you mentioned.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't. Yeah, I did think it looked very familiar. It reminds me also of, is it Chechen Itza, the very top, behind you,
Yeah.
just behind your head. Yeah, because I I had one or two friends who were posting a lot about their little 1 week summer holiday they got to do to Mexico or Latin America, and they went and did the historical stuff rather than the touristy stuff, and that definitely looks familiar to me. I saw a lot of little temples and Aztec ruins. Unfortunately, they fall into ruin, but they are being preserved and some of them are being rebuilt, and the cultures and the peoples who are still around, there is a movement now that's not just kind of online, let's help them out, but kind of on the ground, let's try and revive these traditions and keep them alive, because otherwise these languages and cultures and people will vanish forever. And we've already taken, as civilization and empires, we've taken so much in the West, we've taken so much from these places. So the least we can do is try and help them survive after centuries of exploitation. While the Mayan Empire was going on, which was, I think, pre-Aztec by a fair amount, there was one in South Asia called the Mauryan Empire, and it's kind of spelt in English, kind of like the Mayan Empire, but you add a U and an R. So Mauryan. And they are part of what descended from what's known as the Indus Valley civilization. So the Indus Valley is a huge thing that goes from kind of very southernmost Russia into like a lot of the stands that I'm not quite sure, like Kazakhstan, kind of definitely into Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Himalayas. That entire area, there's a huge river basin because there are many rivers that congregate from the mountainous regions, and of course from the Himalayas, and then they have obviously rivulets, rivers, streams, tributaries, and find their way to the different seas and oceans around Asia and the Middle East. But all of that area, water is regarded as the mother nature embodied by water, as well as in the green and the lush landscapes around, and the hills and the mountains. Mountains are revered in Tao beliefs, and it's, I think, what people call pantheism, pantheistic beliefs. So a belief that the divine is found in nature. And William Wordsworth was somebody who wrote poetry about this very, very openly. He was in love with flowers and trees, and he talks about it a lot. Someone who was a bit more subtle and metaphysical, the way Catherine was describing, would be William Blake. He's one of my favorite poets. And I'd say also Walt Whitman. So I'd say Walt Whitman is one of the greatest American poets ever, and William Blake is my greatest English poet ever. And they talk about very similar things thematically to what we're talking about in terms of spirituality. There's more than meets the eye, and there are certain places that can evoke spiritual reflection that is far greater. But you don't need to rely on man-made institutions to find something greater, because it's all within you. And I think that's a very, very dharmic, very Zen spiritual concept that's at the core of what the Jedi meant to be about, but what the Jedi fall away from at times and become corrupt and become warmongering generals without meaning to, and eventually fall.
The temples of nature being John Muir's views of Yosemite Valley, the Temple of Yosemite.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
John Muir, very, very much enamored by the nature and the wonderment of the beauty of Yosemite and the surrounding mountains and valleys, and his explorations through those places.
Wow, I can imagine. I'm gonna definitely Google angles of Yosemite now and find some wallpapers. I need to visit. I think when you're in a place of nature, especially in lockdown, just to keep it into our real world a second, I think you find refuge in nature, and there's a sanctuary in spirituality. That's why whenever I go for a walk, I always make sure I sit somewhere green, even in the rain. If it's on a bench, I'll just make sure there's a moment where I see as few people, but as many natural, non-human things as possible. So animals, trees, a field, ideally on a hill. It's much easier to do, and because then you get the horizon in. And even if it's a gray, stormy, cloudy day, just hearing the birds kind of not necessarily singing, but communicating while it's lashing it down, or singing in the summer, whatever time of day it is, morning, evening, night. Yeah, I think for me, there's a refuge there, and I take solace. And I think a lot of people who have traveled like us, just walked around or traveled back when we could travel everywhere, or historically are spiritual or religious figures of importance to culture who have walked around a lot, such as Christ, such as the Prophet Muhammad, Moses to Buddha, definitely, Guru Nanak from the Sikh faith, Confucius and Lao Tzu. They all were travelers. They were people who didn't necessarily, so I think, didn't necessarily preach, but more had a message that was of peace and love and unity. And so if you met them on their travels, they would share that with you, and that would become, you know, either a written story, historically we can check, or it become a fable or a myth that's passed down through oral tradition.
Well, and again, moving you into the modern is John Muir being the traveler and he who would walk through nature and show you that valley. It's a slight coincidence that I'm wearing this Star Wars and travel base, because the past two summers during the pandemic, when you can't go to concerts, you can't go to large gatherings, and all those things weren't happening. But I've found my solace in is I've done a fair amount of traveling around the United States to national parks. National parks have been open, and these vast open spaces where you can, you know, figuratively be free of your mask and still safe within the confines of nature, because the people are not there.
Yeah, that's a great blessing, I think. I do know that within the UK and Europe, all the national parks have become very popular to go to, and any Airbnb or hotels or hostels nearby have been fully booked, you know, a month or two ahead, whenever the weather's been relatively stable. In the UK, the weather's never stable, so it's a bit easier to find accommodation. But I agree, there's a hill near where I am, and it's just got a great view of London. We're in the northwest suburbs, but we're only about 8-9 miles out from the very city centre, Westminster, Houses of Parliament, the London Eye, Big Ben, and I can see Wembley Stadium from the hill. I can see the Shard, which is the biggest building in the UK, which is next to London and Tower Bridge, which is a great landmark. And this is the thing, even man-made or human-made artificial institutions and constructions, they carry a lot of spiritual resonance too. Because imagine all the hard work and labor that's gone into the men and women who are grafting to create it physically. You'll lay the bricks, so to speak, even though bricklaying is not really involved in these huge buildings now. Operate the cranes and work for, you know, months or years on end. The architects, the planning permission, the counselors, the financing, the accounting, all this energy, this time. That's what we're talking about with the world between worlds. It's a moment where energy and time are paused, and you can reflect on how important they are through all these almost screenshots of your life.
Well, that's why I think David's onto something there when he's talking about all the places in nature, like kind of like you know, you go to Zion National Park, where supposedly, you know, that's where the Mormons have all of their thing, where their religion kind of started. You know, never mind the psilocybin growing around the cabin, but that's another story. But it's the whole idea that you go somewhere that you really never been to before, places that are just totally majestic, like you're talking about when you see Yosemite, when you see the California redwoods for the first time, and the way John Muir, you know, we named the woods after him over there on the coast, and the way they describe these things when they see them, particularly when you go out to go stargazing and things of that nature, and it's like, which is why technically you could argue any church is kind of a way for the world between worlds as well, because it is a very self-reflective type of experience, and how, you know, they provide various texts for how to live your life and stuff like that. And like the world between worlds gives Ezra certainly an opportunity to reflect on some of his own choices and whether or not he wants to intervene. It's like, no, you have to be really careful about that type of thing.
So let me ask this question and see your opinions on it. We're talking about going to this place in nature, but how we're going to the spiritual end and how that associates to the world within worlds isn't necessarily a physicality. It's we're going to that within our minds. Is the world between worlds in Star Wars, is it a physical place? Is it something that happens to those people within the Force, within their minds?
That's a good point, because that maybe it isn't a pocket dimension. Same with Mortis. Maybe it was just something they envisioned, like some type of a intense dream state or something like that. Kind of like, you know, back in Egypt, the pharaohs would have dream interpreters because they believed their dreams meant something extra important, you know, compared to the dreams of the average people. And so yeah, that's a good point, because it's like it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical place. So I was mentioning that any old church for whichever religion could technically be another representation of the idea of what the world between worlds really is.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think all any spiritual house, so whether it's an organized belief system or religion or spiritual tradition, I think you can have that moment because it's about internal journeying. The Odyssey is the one within. I think as soon as you start looking for the answers outside of you, to quote Yoda, it's in The Last Jedi, right? Where he says that girl Rey has everything that she needs. And of course, he's kind of trolling and saying, "Oh, she has the Jedi text. You just didn't see it." But what he's actually saying is the content of Rey's character and her spirit, which is what Snoke fears, but also extols when he tries to torture her, saying, in your heart is the very spirit of a Jedi." He's saying that's actually what I fear. That's what I want to corrupt. That's what I want to use against Kylo Ren, or with Kylo Ren against the Resistance and against Luke Skywalker, and to end the Jedi. And why his motivations were that inclined, we will never know. Although Jon Favreau, I think, has an idea to tie up those loose ends. But it's something about your core belief. And this is something I just realized as I was walking home today. I think the term core might have a similar etymology to in Latin languages, such as in French, la coeur, which is the heart, C-O-E-U-R. So your core, your heart, not necessarily your anatomical, physiological heart, but of course that as well, because it's in the middle left of your chest. Your spirit, your mind. So whatever you believe, if there's a soul or not. In Eastern faiths, they talk about the chakras. So there's about the idea of spiritual and mental balance, emotional discipline. Is not about eliminating, your anger, your lust, your pride. It's about acknowledging them, being aware of those little monkeys shouting for your attention in the mind zoo that is your head. But then knowing, okay, I'll sprinkle a few pine nuts here, throw a few peanuts there, and they'll be quiet. And then I can watch the majestic lion just do his thing, or the lioness do her thing. And that can be what you focus on. I think meditation often is confused with the mindfulness kind of
right. And I think that's why Ahsoka was a lot more disciplined when she first got pulled into the world between worlds, because even though she was seeing it for the first time, she almost immediately started cautioning Ezra about, dude, don't mess with this. This is something. Whereas Ezra is obviously very much all over the place, still trying to figure out where he is in life, which is kind of, I think, what the whole purpose and a bit of the Mortis trilogy was. It's sort of like each of those characters had something to say to Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka, which was deeply personal to them. And with Obi-Wan, of course, he's going to listen to Qui-Gon, so it appeared in the form of Qui-Gon, whereas Ahsoka, she's going to listen to her master, so of course her vision appeared in the form of Anakin, whereas Anakin was just so much all over the place. He was willing to listen to characters like the son and the father directly. But it is like trying to caution them on being, caution them on being very disciplined with what they're doing, which is why I think it would have been fascinating if we could see what Yoda would have done if he had gone there. Like what would he have seen?
Yeah, maybe Yoda did see a little bit of what we did in his own Odyssey at the end of the Lost Missions, because as you were saying, those Force priestesses, who knows who they are? I don't think they are related. I don't think they are directly any of the big three that we're talking about, but I do think they are manifestations of the Force, avatars of the Force, voices from past, present, future. And then if you go back to time as a flat circle, everything that's going on has already happened and is already happening and is already about to happen. And I think that's a great way of, I guess, to wrap things up, because we will have to very soon, of something to remember always, because I have had difficulties with decision making, with anxiety, and with various other mental, emotional struggles, as we all have. And Star Wars is something that's helped me a lot, as escapism, as adventure, as fun, but also as deep reflection. And it's been a gateway to other things. It's been a world between other worlds of literary canon and fantasy and sci-fi, and all escapism, but it's grounded in reality, which is why it relates to me and resonates with my core. And I think if you take the concept that's currently being accepted in modern physics, without going into kind of quantum stuff, which I'm not qualified to really talk about, but I've read a bit, and it's touched upon in the MCU, and it's definitely in the world between worlds. That is, everything is going on, and you have if you accept that, okay, destiny or free will, don't worry about whether you have one or the other, because both exist. Just go with the actual flow of time. Go with the flow of events. Go with whatever you feel is better, whatever gives you more positive energy, whatever gives you more emotional reward, without harming yourself or harming others or harming the planet. That's what you should do. Follow that gut instinct, because your gut will never lie to you. And your gut, a friend of mine told me in my first year of university, your gut is God. If you believe God, believe your gut, because that's God telling you deep down, way below your heart, that this is what you shouldn't do. This is what you should do. So if ever you're on the fence about something, or on the brink, you feel, of collapse or calamity or a total breakdown or burnout, remember, if you're struggling with a decision or struggling with an event or a person or an experience, you've already surmounted this obstacle in a parallel dimension. In another world, between other worlds, there's a window where you've already cleared that hurdle. You've already jumped, broken the high jump record. You've already got the gold medal at the Olympics. You've already given in your homework. You've already asked her out or him out. You've already got that promotion. It's okay. So don't worry about it. Just go with whatever you're feeling right now, because that's the right answer. And the things in the past and your trauma, your baggage that we all carry, that's okay as well. Don't feel you have to forcibly let it go, although it's a very good song and very catchy concept. You can hold on to it if it means something to you, because there's a reason why your mind keeps drifting back. And you don't punish yourself in the same way that you don't shout at the monkeys of anger and pride and materialism and lust in your head, thinking, oh, I mustn't think that. This is a bad thought. It's sinful. I don't think any spiritual tradition, any spiritual figure from our history would ever say to you, no, you don't do this because it's wrong. You don't do it because it's not good for you or not good for others. And you do the things that are good for you and good for others. And if you use that as the golden rule, which is what Confucius came up with 3,000 years ago, that's a good way to stay positive in life and to keep going in a very Jedi and of the unifying
trust in the
force type way.
force, Gio, and listen to where it guides you. Trust in
Exactly. That is the way. The way is the pathway that you choose.
That is it. Now, one practical question to end it up completely.
Yep.
Do you think the world within worlds, we've mentioned very Star Trekian, we've mentioned the Loki series, we've mentioned the MCU. Do you think that the world between worlds will be a guideline to actual time travel in the Star Wars universe, as it has been that sort of thing in the MCU and in Star Trek?
Eventually, yeah. I don't think they'll use it as frequently as those other series do, or just flippantly, but I think that's kind of where they're going. Because I mean, if the only thing they invented the world between worlds for was to save Ahsoka in a unique way, other than saying, "Oh, she managed to escape from Vader," well, that'd be really cheap. And I don't think that's why they invented it, because the fact that the Mortis trilogy came like 4 years before that, then obviously, since that was clearly tied into the world between worlds from the get-go, then this obviously is leading somewhere. But I think that they might use it a bit more extensively, not for the purposes of retconning things, but it's going to lead up to something otherwise significant. I'm not sure what that is yet, but yeah, I do think they're going to use that as a eventual time travel type map in some way.
So, there won't just be this big portal on some random planet where they can go, back in time and save Edith Keeler from being run over by a car.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be like Stargate, where they can program exactly where they want to go, or like a traditional time machine, or like the particle things in Endgame, where they can just magically go to wherever they want because the plot demanded it. I don't think it's going to be that.
Yeah, I think. Well, what if you get War Machine who gestures to Hawkeye? What if we just go back in time and find not Thanos, but Sheev Palpatine as a baby, and then go? That they won't resort to that, but I think they will touch on it again, maybe with subtlety, with metaphysical, spiritual aspect, without being so explicit, and definitely not using the term time travel. I don't think they joked about the term and the idea in Endgame, and they were good to do that, because then they kind of moved away from the tropes that we know of, while mentioning the tropes for humor, which can work in Marvel. It can work less well in Star Wars, and it can really annoy some Star Wars fans, as we've seen in some of the films. But if you read Darth Vader 2017, the graphic novel series of 25 issues, I got it in hardback, volumes 1 to 12, and then 13 to 25.
Yeah, it's the whole thing. The whole series is coming to Omnibus in October.
Oh, awesome. I'd recommend reading it as soon as possible.
Yeah, I haven't.
Is he gonna
I
use-
deliberately haven't read it because I always wait till they
Oh.
put out big collections because it's so much cheaper and better.
True. I mean, I really love the 2 hardback versions I have, volume 1 and 2. They're nice.
Right, but quick question: did we have any questions today?
We have no
Um,
questions. I have asked for questions in the chat, but we have seen none.
That's
So
okay.
no questions to answer. We went a little bit over, but we started a little bit late. So
Okay.
that's pretty much the time we have for this week. Please join us again in 2 weeks for
3
another
weeks.
episode of the Unifying Force.
It'll-
And join
it'll-
us again next week for an episode of
Jedi Archive.
Jedi
Catherine's saying, is it 3
no,
weeks?
I was saying that next week is nothing because there's a 5th Sunday this month, so there's
very
nothing
good.
next week. The next episode of Jedi Archives will be September 5th, and the next episode of Unifying Force will be September 12th.
Excellent. Yes, I did
All
not
right.
look at my calendar previously, so thank
I
you
mean,
for that
that's all right.
clarification. And as always, join us on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Join us for the virtual Cantina happy hour on Tuesdays, where anything can happen. And on Thursdays, where we will be watching the behind the scenes, the gallery episode for The Mandalorian. And then as
That should be
September
great.
goes along, we're going to branch out. We're going to get a little bit crazy. We're going to go into alternate theories of time where Harrison Ford is Indiana Jones. Is that really a Star Wars property or not? No, C3.
Oh,
He
that
is.
might be
Hey,
because
R2 and hey,
not only R2 and
3PO
3PO, but the staff of Ra and the Ark of the Covenant. are both
yeah, I was gonna say they're in Raiders. R2 and 3PO are in
Absolutely.
Raiders.
So maybe they are just the world between worlds, alternate dimensions, and other lives of Han Solo.
What a
All right.
segue. Finished.
So thank you very much, friends, for joining us.
Thank you.
And let's see, we are
Bye.
done.
May the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you all.